Oh.
Yeah, baby.
Oh, yeah.
Our theme for March is wisdom. And in planning the services this month, I have attempted to cover a lot of ground. I just want to fill everyone in. Last week, we looked at a somewhat kindred spirit religion. And on the 15th and 22nd, we will have guests, friends of mine from seminary, so be nice to them, sharing their perspectives as Muslim and Christian theologians. And finally, at the end of the month, we will look at the wisdom of the arts, particularly music, specifically jazz. But today, on International Women's Day, we will talk about women. Content warning, we're going to talk about violence against women. Just want to put that out there. I sewed this cloak many months ago after binge watching the horrifically dystopian, although alarmingly close to home, Hulu version of Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. Oddly enough, the day I was in Joann Fabric searching for my materials, I found myself side by side with another woman, also perusing the red fabrics. And we looked at one another, and we looked at the fabric, looked back at one another, and then she said, "Handmaids?" I nodded. She then told me that she was preparing for protesting, and I told her I was doing the same. Now, there are all kinds of problems with the Handmaid's Tale TV show, and perhaps also in the original book, which when I read it in 1987 completely blew my mind. But realistic or not, white woman-flavored feminist or not, suffering porn or not, The Handmaid's Tale, as it is portrayed on the screen, is a glaring reminder that women have been and will always be a target for being silenced, until we collectively, not tokenly, recognize the thousands-year-old tradition of wisdom, intuition, and power that women bring to the world. In The Handmaid's Tale, we see an extreme religious society that has let an archaic and regularly misinterpreted text, the Hebrew and Christian Bible, also known as Old and New Testaments, create a world that silences women, disallows their learning and education, enslaves them as incubators, and victimizes them through rape. Did it seem far-fetched when published in 1985? Maybe, although Atwood has said her inspiration came from real events she was witnessing around the world. Does it seem far-fetched today? Not to me. I have a sick joke I make when people ask me where my daughter Rafaela is going to college next year. I tell them St. Lawrence University, and then I say, I'm really glad she chose a place so close to the Canadian border. That way, when the United States becomes Gilead, she has a chance of escaping into Ontario. Funny, not funny.
Yeah.
When you watch The Handmaid's Tale, you have to ask why such hatred towards women? Why? Actually, you can just turn on the news or open the Times and ask, why is this country, patriarchy, so threatened by women? Why has society over time and into the present day done all it could to silence the voices of women, especially those who are highly intelligent, eminently qualified, and able to articulate thoughtful plans to restructure society into something more just, equitable, equal, and humane? Why is it so that, in the words of Canadian social policy pioneer Charlotte Whitten, whatever women do, they must do twice as well as men to be thought half as good?
And wear high heels.
Here.
And dance backwards.
And heels.
Whitten does end her quip with the line, "Luckily, this is not difficult." Perhaps it's not that difficult, but it is exhausting. It is exhausting to have to work twice as hard. It is exhausting to not be taken seriously. It is exhausting to watch mediocrity rise to the top because the gender container you were born into is seen as less valuable. It is exhausting to be victimized and then blamed for it because of something you wore, something you drank, something you said. It is exhausting. What's that quote floating now? All the women in me are exhausted. And it all started somewhere. Women, as life givers, have always been a perceived threat. Well, actually, in many ancient cultures, the fact that women created life made them revered. They were valued the way the earth was valued. There are models of societies, few and far between, that are matrilineal or matriarchal, that value both, or rather all forms, because it's not necessarily binary, all forms equally. But at some point in time, a few thousand years ago, men who would bleed on battlefields and die started to ask the question, how is it that women bleed yet do not die? The fact that we seemingly overcame death every month and could also create and carry life must have been just too much for them to bear. In seminary, I was fortunate enough to encounter a doctoral student, now a PhD, Celine Lilly, very briefly, whose research on the Nag Hammadi scrolls, which are what they call the Gnostic writings found in the Egyptian desert in 1945, introduced me to two texts, On the Origin of the World and The Secret Revelation of John. These are both creation stories, but actually appear to be pre-creation stories, as in pre-Genesis. All of us here probably have some experience with creation stories. Every culture has them, and they are quite varied. The Onondaga Nation believes Earth came to be on a turtle's back. And the Abenaki teach how creator Bluskabi gave himself form from the dust he wiped from his hands after creating human beings. For the Abrahamic religious traditions, the book of Genesis is the creation we are all told to believe at some point in our lives. Many of us, especially UUs, have vehemently questioned not just the story, but also the notion of why this particular story, this tale that was meant as an allegory, has stuck and still abides when there are so many more inclusive and evidence-based creation stories we could engage with. In any case, I was taught the whole Eve was made from Adam's rib story, right? And in seminary, then I learned that actually, prior to that passage in Genesis, God apparently makes both Adam and Eve at the same time from the earth, right? So right within the text, we see evidence disproving this hierarchical thinking, that man is superior to woman because woman was made from him. In that same biblical book, we also hear how Eve lured Adam to eat fruit from the tree of knowledge, thus the downfall of humankind. Eve, therefore, is not simply beneath Adam, but the cause of man's undoing.
Guilty.
But when Celine shared her writings with us, the story got even stranger. In her dissertation, which is now turned into a book entitled The Rape of Eve, Celine writes this. I'm just going to quote her. This episode in On the Origin of the World is as follows. Sophia sees Adam, created by the rulers of the world, abandoned by them and lying on the ground. He is unable to stand because he lacks a soul. So Sophia sends her daughter Eve as an instructor to help him arise. Eve goes to him and tells him to stand, and her word becomes manifest, and Adam arises. The rulers see that Adam is alive and that Eve is the one who has given him life. Then, jealous of her power, the rulers decide to rape her. They do this not only in an effort to defile her, but so that she will bear their children who will become their subjects. They also decide to place a sleep on Adam. in order to deceive him into believing that Eve came from his rib, to make her subject to him, and he lord over her. But Eve, knowing their plan beforehand, laughs at them, blinding them and leaving her body with Adam, while she herself enters the tree of knowledge. When the rulers recover, they see Eve's shadow and mistake it for her true self. They then rape her body in all manner of ways, including her voice, which spoke the truth and made words manifest. As a result of the ruler's rape, Eve bears their children, children who are subject to them, in that they are also children of ignorance. Despite the success of the ruler's plan, they are still fearful of Adam and Eve and worry that they will be conquered by them. So again, the rulers plot against them, telling Adam and Eve that they may eat from any tree in the garden except the tree of knowledge, the tree where the true Eve is. And if they dare to eat from that tree, they will die. When Adam and Eve are once again alone in the garden, the serpent comes to them. But here, the serpent is good, the wisest of all creatures. The serpent tells them that the ruler's words are lies, that the fruit will open their minds to good and evil, and that the rulers want to keep them from this knowledge out of jealousy. Eve believes the words of the serpent, goes to the beautiful tree, and loves it. Eve takes the fruit from the tree and eats it. Then she gives fruit to Adam, and he eats as well. With these acts of eating, they integrate what was lost through violence, enacted by the rulers, and become enlightened. In their enlightenment, they knew that, indeed, it was the rulers who were evil, and they also saw each other and loved one another. This is a very different story than what I learned in CCD. The rulers, plural, included a female god named Sophia, which means wisdom in Greek, who in essence saves Adam through her daughter Eve. Then violence and power seek to divide Adam and Eve and distort their relationship, yet in the end, they become equal partners. To quote Paul Harvey, there's the rest of the story. And a story that would have, had it not been buried in a desert for almost 2,000 years, changed the course of history. Or would it have? We know that prior to monotheism and the rise of Christianity, early cultures were polytheistic and/or goddess-based societies. Think of Isis and Ishtar. I pray unto thee, lady of ladies, goddess of goddesses. O Ishtar, queen of all peoples, directress of mankind. O Ernini, thou art raised high, mistress of the spirits of heaven. Thou art mighty, thou hast sovereign power. Exalted is thy name. And yet, the sacred feminine was forced underground. We probably have the Romans to thank for that, among others. But what if we hadn't stopped listening to Anahit, Angea, Artemis, Aphrodite, Bast, Bronwyn, Brigid, Clemencia, Danu, Dilga, Urkala, Freya, Frigg, Gaia, Hera, Inanna, Isis, Juno, Lakshmi, Luna, Ma'at, Manat, Nuva, Olwyn, Ocean, Ostara, Parvati, Prende, Tanit, Tara, Temus, Vasudhara, Venus, and Vespa, guardian of the sacred flame. Oh yeah, and Eve. What if we had heard and honored the real story of Eve? Would our world look different? Probably. So before we walk any closer to a future where Gilead is a real possibility, let us reclaim the sacred feminine. The world needs the sacred feminine. The teachings of wisdom and love, of caregiving and caretaking, of connection and creation. Mirabai Starr's book, Wild Mercy, invites us all to reconnect with the sacred feminine. all of us, male, female, non-binary, gender fluid, trans, all of us, through contemplation and celebration and calling out the damage that patriarchy sows, can tap into our inner feminine and masculine, can acknowledge that they coexist. We can find a balance. We can help swing the pendulum. It is no longer acceptable to assume that this is the way things are. The patriarchy has created a world that fills me with fear and sadness and exhaustion. But there is another way. It is time for us to replace the crown of jewels with a crown of daisies. Praise one another's beauty and wisdom and build fires to keep one another warm. May it be so.